Hello and welcome. My name is Alex Bennett, and I am the owner of Milwaukee Music Lessons. I've been teaching music for 15 years now, and I've worked with over 300 students of all ages. I mostly teach guitar and drums, and I'm also experienced with piano, voice, and a few other instruments. If you've been following the series, we're walking through what I consider the 5 essential pillars of music education. So far, we've talked about technique, we've talked about experience, and theory. And today we're going to be diving into the fourth pillar, ear training. Now, ear training might sound technical or intimidating, but it's actually pretty simple and can be a very powerful tool. It means learning to use your ears to understand music, which is important. We use our ears for listening all the time. So, in this episode, I'll explain what ear training is, why it matters for beginners and experienced players alike, and how you, as a student or a music learner, can start using it. And by the end, you're going to see how ear training can make learning music easier, faster, and a bit more enjoyable. So let's start by defining what ear training is. It's pretty important, right? Ear training is the process of teaching your ears to recognize musical sounds without needing to see sheet music or instrument tabs. It's learning to identify notes, chords, rhythms, and patterns simply by listening. That's not necessarily about being born with talent. It's not necessarily having perfect pitch, which is a totally different thing. And it's definitely not for advanced musicians only. It's for everybody. Ear training is simply listening practice. And the way that we learn to understand language is by listening, and we can train our ears to understand music in the exact same way. So, why does ear training matter? For beginners, it's very helpful for you to hear when you make mistakes and how to fix them faster. If you're an intermediate player, then it's going to help you learn songs by ear and play with a bit more confidence. And if you're in that upper echelon, if you're a more advanced musician, it's going to make you more adaptable. It's going to make you more accurate, and it's going to help you become expressive with your instrument. In general, it also is really good at helping strengthening your memory. It helps you improve your timing, and it helps improve independence with your instrument from the rest of the band. Students who have strong ears typically don't rely as much on the written music. They understand what the sound is supposed to be like, and that helps make things a bit more intuitive. So let's try and break down instrument by instrument what some of the benefits that you are going to see are. I'm going to focus mostly on the 4 instruments that we teach. If you're a guitarist, you're going to develop the ability to figure out your songs by ear more. You're going to hear chord progressions without having to necessarily even see stuff on the page. Or at the very least, if you see stuff on the page, you're going to be able to, I guess, figure out what it should sound like before you actually hear it. And you're going to be able to improvise in a much more fluent manner. If you're a piano player, you're going to learn to match melodies and harmonies much quicker. You're going to be able to accompany others with a much more intuitive sense, and you're going to be able to memorize music much faster. Now, drummers, you start to become more responsive to things like dynamic changes. You're able to know where transitions in music happen on a much more intuitive level, and you're going to be able to lock in with other musicians a lot more tightly. And then finally, if you're a vocalist, you're going to learn how to sing much more accurately. You're going to be able to match pitch with much greater confidence. And you're going to you're going to get to harmonize in a much more natural way without having to have written parts. So let's actually break down the core teaching elements of ear training. It's one thing to describe what ear training is, but how would you actually go about learning and improving your ears? So let's start with rhythm first. Rhythm ear training is all about listening to beats, patterns, and timings and being able to recognize them in the wild. Simple exercises like hearing a rhythm and clapping back patterns or tapping to steady beats help build things like timing and focus. And this is really helpful for every instrument. We all need timing, but especially for drummers, piano players, and guitar players, they have to train their internal sense of pulse so that way they can improve their ability to stay in sync with everybody else. So here's a quick breakdown of what rhythm training and what the progression looks like. So if you're a beginner, if you've never done any of this before, You're usually starting with really basic notes. You're starting with simple stuff like quarter notes, half notes, whole notes, eighth notes. You're incorporating simple rests in places, and you're often sticking with 4/4 time signatures, 4/4 meter. As you get more advanced, as you start to break into that intermediate level, now you start to deal with syncopation, things that are happening on the ands or the in between beats only, kind of like reggae music. You're starting to deal with triplets. You're dealing with much more dotted rhythms, and you're starting to handle compound time signatures, stuff like 6/8 in particular is a common one. And then if you're breaking into the advanced level, now you're dealing with polyrhythms. You're handling mixed meters, more complicated time signatures. You're dealing with much more groove based patterns. And you're dealing with rhythmic dictation. So you're having to actually enunciate all of these different syllables and stuff. How would you actually go through this? How would you improve this? Here's a few techniques, a few examples of what you can try. So, one, you can use a metronome, always very important when it comes to timing because metronomes are 100% accurate and they give you honest feedback of where you are. But you can use a metronome and you can clap along to different subdivisions. So, things like quarter notes and eighth notes, or you could do triplets if you're in that more intermediate or advanced stage. There are lots of different apps or rhythms that you can use nowadays. That you can use things like Rhythm Lab, or you can simply tap back rhythms you hear in your favorite songs. Melody. So, melody ear training focuses on pitch. Exercises can include things like singing back short melodies, identifying whether a note is higher or lower. This is super helpful for any instrument that uses any sort of melodic phrasing, but even percussion instruments, like if you're a drummer, you need to know where you are, and the better your ears are with identifying pitches is helpful. But obviously, voice, piano, guitar, those things are going to be super, super helpful. It's going to train your pitch accuracy. It's going to help you with singing in tune. You're going to learn melodies faster, and you're going to recognize musical phrases without having to have the sheet music right in front of you. So, what does progression look like for the different stages? If you're a beginner, you're typically using very simple stepwise motion, often in a major scale. So, if you've ever heard stuff like do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, that's solfege, is what we call that. And doing the basic up and down runs through major scales, that is a very common beginner tactic. And then obviously things like simple 3 or 5 note phrases using your solfege patterns. You can even use common like nursery rhymes to help you. So if you know how to sing your ABCs, you can learn how to sing the ABCs using nothing but solfege. If you're in the intermediate level, now you're doing skips and leaps much more. You might be doing things like arpeggios. You can start to work on pentatonic scales, or you can even have more common call and response melodies. And then finally, if you're in the advanced stage, this is where things can start to get really crazy. So you're seeing more chromatic movements, some much jazzier stuff going on. You're doing mode-based melodies. So you're outside of just basic major and minor. You're starting to do things like Dorian and Mixolydian and various modes that way. And then finally, you have interval and phrase dictation, much more common. So techniques to try. I already mentioned using solfege syllables, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. You want to use it with singing familiar melodies. There's quite a few tools online nowadays. Tone Savvy is a particular example to try and identify intervals and short melodic patterns. There's a few other ones that I'll throw out there in a little bit, but that's a good one. And then obviously singing before playing can help you build strong pitch recognition. So let's get into chord training here a little bit. Chord ear training helps you with recognizing harmony. It teaches you to hear the differences between major and minor chords, or to recognize common chord progressions. This is especially valuable for piano and chord players, the chordal instruments, but even for like singers and drummers, you want to be able to have a good idea for where the chord progressions are going to begin or end. And so having that intuitive feeling where chord progressions are moving, very helpful. So what does this look like at different levels? If you're a beginner, then you're starting a lot with basic major minor triads. So you're trying to build out the 3 notes that make up the progression. And you're sticking a lot with the most common cadences, a 1-5-1 progression, for example, just understanding the feeling of going from what we call tonic to dominant and back and forth. And then after that, if you progress into the intermediate levels, now you're starting to deal with more common chord progressions. So things like 1 5 6 4, 1 4 6 5, 1 4 5 1, 2 5 1. These are very common chord progressions that you see in a lot of pop and rock music and things like that. And then if you get into the advanced levels, now we're starting to get into more complicated stuff. We're adding sevenths, ninths, 11s, 13s, what we call extended chords or tensions. You're starting to deal with modal progressions, and you're starting to deal with much more complicated jazz harmony. So those are the much more advanced levels. Let's talk with techniques that you can start to work with. So you want to start by listening and just see if you can identify major versus minor chords. Basically, you're trying to identify things like happy versus sad. And then you can use different apps or keyboard exercises to start to identify these 1 4 5 1 progressions. There's a few ear training apps too that we'll talk about here in just a second. Ear training with chords, pretty simple. If you are already a piano or a guitar player, you can use these to your advantage. Now, big picture, here's some of the stuff that ear training helps you out with. So if you're good with your ear training, you're going to learn faster. You're going to have better critical listening. You're going to have a sharper memory, improved confidence, and you're going to have better long-term growth. You're going to definitely avoid some pitfalls when you start to get into the more advanced sections of your music journey. Not music theory. Ear training as a whole gives you much more real independence. You're not just waiting for someone to tell you if it's right or wrong. You have basically a built-in internal thermometer. My gosh, I can't talk today. And you're going to start to hear these mistakes yourself. And that's a huge leap forward. I try to tell my students, imagine if I was there every day to give you feedback. If your ears are good enough, then that's exactly what it is. You're giving yourself the ability to self-correct. It's going to help you also connect your technique and your theory to the real world music, which makes whatever experience you have even stronger. And once your ear is trained, the music feels much more natural. It's less about just playing the notes, and now you're actually starting to feel things for a change. Now, if you want to start building your ear training skills, there's a couple of great resources that I want to recommend. We talked about a few already, but these two are ones that I and some of the trainers here have personal experience with. So I'm going to start by recommending musictheory.net. They have a whole section there for exercises that is totally, completely free. Some of it's music theory related, some of it's ear training related. They do have an app that you can get on your phone. I think it's only for Apple stuff. I could be wrong on that, called Tenuto. And it's $5 or $6, and it's a one-time thing. I have it personally on my phone and on my iPad, and I love it. It's a completely free website with excellent interactive exercises on chords, intervals, and different ear trainings basics, and it's really nice for beginners and even more advanced players to work with. The other one that I want to recommend is Rick Beato's ear training program. If anybody watching this knows who Rick Beato is, that guy is a professional through and through, and he offers a lot of really excellent stuff. I've bought stuff from him in the past, and he's been really fantastic. It is a paid program, but it's very structured, which is really nice. The musictheory.net one is not structured. You have to create your own exercises. And Rick Beato, he goes deep. He goes really deep on stuff. So it's especially more helpful for beginners or serious players who want to really fully train your ear and access the deep learnings of melody, harmony, and rhythm. So both are excellent tools depending on your goals, time, and budget, but those are the two that I personally recommend more than any of them. So today we covered the fourth pillar of music training, or music learning, ear training, and we talked about what it is, why it matters, and really how it helps with rhythm, melody, and chords. And we also saw how it leads to faster progress and deeper musical understanding. Now, in the next episode, we're going to explore the fifth and final pillar of effective music education, which is creativity. We're going to talk about how students can take everything they've learned and start creating music on their own. That might be improvising, that might be writing songs, or it could just be adding their own flourishes and experimenting with other people's songs. So creativity is where it tends to all come together, and we're going to talk about how it's helpful at every age and every experience level and for all of the instruments that we teach here. So if you found this episode helpful, please make sure to like, make sure to follow. Share it with anybody else that you think would enjoy it, other music learners, parents of other kids who are learning. Your support helps us reach more people and helps us keep growing the community. So thank you for listening. My name is Alex Bennett, and we will see y'all in the next episode. Take care.